Welcome to the Cash Flow Academy podcast. Andy Tanner here. I'm your host. This is where we make investing fun, simple, real. Wonderful guest today. We have Angus Fletcher with us. He's wrote an interesting book. It's a primal book. I love going primal. And his book is titled Primal Intelligence. You're smarter than you know. And with so many years of refining and for those that, some say natural selection has got us pretty smart. Other people say we've been given that from a higher power. But either way, there's some intuition about all this. Maybe we are smarter than we think. I don't know if I don't put myself in that group, and I have the bad grades to prove it. But make sure you like and subscribe and go to cashflowbonus.com for goodies and free things to help you move yourself along your education. So, Angus Fletcher, welcome, and tell us, let's just begin a little bit of background about who you are and, why you got interested in this area of study, and then finally why you decided to write Primal Intelligence.
So I'm a professor at Ohio State. I work at a lab called Project Narrative. And the reason I got interested in this is because I was contacted by United States Army Special Operations about 5 years ago. And they said to me, Andy, we're having a problem, which is that we're having these kids coming out of school and they've got these great test scores. You know, when you just look at their ability to answer these standardized tests, you would just think that their intelligence is off the charts. But it turns out that when you put them in real world situations, they're not functioning that well. They're having a hard time. And, Professor Fletcher, we know you've got a slightly different theory about intelligence, and we'd like to come and, test that with some of our operators and see if it confirms some of the stuff that we've discovered ourselves about how the brain works. And so that's kind of how the book came about. And the basic point of the book is that humans have a lot of intelligence in our heads that is being beaten out of us by school and too much technology use. And you can get it back pretty quick if you just start to get in touch with your own instincts.
This is fantastic stuff. There's a saying that says when emotion goes up, intelligence goes down, and I think there's some truth to that. I know that when I've gotten overly happy or overly confident or overly angry or overly sad, I've said things that I would like to reel back in and that. But I also think there's something to be said for there's some about going with your gut. And we have a conscious mind and we have a subconscious mind. And I think that subconscious mind observes a lot of stuff and can pick up things that maybe we don't consciously understand. I mean, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Tell me a little bit about this narrative thinking and data thinking. What's the difference between those two things?
Yeah. So first of all, emotion is really smart, but emotion is smart at telling you about your own brain processes. It's not smart about telling you about the world, and that's where people get confused. They think that if I'm happy, the world must be in a good place right now, or if I'm depressed, the world must be going down. That's not what emotion is there for. Emotion is not magic. It's not psychic. It can't tell you about the state of the world. And if you want, we can talk a little bit because a lot of traders and a lot of investors don't know how to understand their own emotions. So we could talk about that in a second if you want. But one of the things that's different about me is a lot of people, for example, I would say Daniel Kahneman and other thinkers, think of this kind of non-conscious intelligence that the human brain has as its ability to fast process all this data that the conscious mind isn't aware of. And I don't think of that at all. I actually think that life is very low data. It's very low information. I think this because I work with special operators who work in these volatile spaces. The Army has a term called VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. It basically means anytime you're inside the churn of modern life where tomorrow is not the same as yesterday, where what was true yesterday, that knowledge pattern is broken. And so I think that the human brain has evolved ways of being smart with very limited information. And so to your question about narrative intelligence, what I think is that narrative evolved in the brain to be able to multiply possible stories of the future. And I think that you get stuck in life when you get stuck on one story. When you're like, this is the way that it's got to be, or this is the truth about things. But when your brain is able to come up with multiple possible stories, then the moment that one of those starts to manifest, you can jump on it faster than anybody else because you've imagined that possibility faster than others.
People might ask me, from time to time, they actually do ask me, Andy, why do you have so many behavioral scientists, neuroscientists, psychologists, and people like that on a podcast? And a lot of people don't know this. I trade stocks and options, and it's widely agreed that the very first really big play on the intrinsic value of a contract, which is really what an option is, was and I pronounce his name all wrong all the time, but it's Thales of Miletus or Thales of Miletus, depending on if you want a long A or short A. And he was the first of the great Greek sages, and he put some leases on some olive oil presses, predicting a bumper crop, and locked all these presses up. Of course, when the bumper crop came, the intrinsic value of these were huge, and he sold them off just like you would an option. A lot of people also, in my study, I realized that he was the person that said this, and this is why I have people like Professor Fletcher on the podcast. He said, "Know thyself." And know thyself is it's an invitation and a warning simultaneously that we're our own greatest asset, but our own greatest enemy. And the more we understand about our own machinery, the better we can navigate it. I used to have an old 1968 Dodge Dart that would get stuck with the transmission, 3 on the tree. And I got under the hood, and there was rods and pins, and I'd yank them apart. And pretty soon I began to visualize how that machinery worked, and I was able to drive it, even though it was flawed. I feel that's the way my brain is. It's not evolved perfectly. It doesn't always perceive the truth all the time. And there's 4 things you talk about here that I think really speak to knowing thyself. 4 primal intelligences or intuitions or experiences that I think if you're going to make decisions, and you talk about this volatility, unpredictability, there's your stock market right there. We're not having bullets fly, but all that VUCA stuff is there. Intuition, emotion, imagination, and common sense, which might not be as common as we wish it were. Could you hit on this idea and you work with military, all walks of, this applies to everyone, as a father, as an investor, as a worker. I have this machinery I work with, and knowing myself. Could you speak about those 4 intelligences and expand on those a bit for our audience?
100%. And let me start with know thyself, because I really appreciate you taking us back to the ancient Greeks, the 7 sages. Yes. Of the Mediterranean, of course. No, this is like already the most intelligent podcast I've ever been on in my life, and I've been on with Malcolm Gladwell, the New York Academy of Sciences. No one's ever asked me this before. So let me talk about know thyself in the context of traders in a way that I think will be directly applicable to them, because this is something that comes from my work with U.S. Special Operations, but is also something that I've seen in a lot of traders. Traders who fail typically for one of 3 reasons. They have no plan for dealing with the market. They have only one plan for dealing with the market, and they have a plan, but they question themselves and they interrupt themselves and they don't execute the plan. So the question is, how do you know when you have no plan, one plan, or you're interrupting a plan that could work and you're self-destructing? How do you know? And the answer is your emotions. So if you have no plan, the way your brain evolved to signal that to you is fear. Fear is your brain's signal that you have no fear. So if you start to feel scared, nervous, really anxious, that's a sign that you have no plan. And when you have no plan, what happens is you start to, because your brain has a bias to action, it starts to try and take a plan from somebody else. And that's when you start chasing the market. And you start going on the internet and looking for stock tips. And you start saying, hey, what did my buddy do, right? You have no plan. That is a sure path to failure, because you are one step behind everybody else and you're going to get wiped out. So if you start feeling scared, back out, exit until you can come in with a plan. How do you know you've only got one plan? When you start getting aggressive, when you start getting angry. You'll notice this in your relationships. You were talking about earlier how good traders are good fathers or good parents, right? Because if you're a good trader, you see all the possibilities. And it's the same thing when you're in a conversation with someone. You see all the possibilities. You're not trying to force them down one track. You're not saying it has to be this way. The moment you're like, it has to be this way, you start getting aggressive, you start getting angry. And you notice that in your trades because you've got like one idea. It's like, gold's got to go up or oil's got to go down or whatever. And when that doesn't start happening, you start getting aggressive. You start trying to force the plan by pumping more and more resources in. The moment you start getting angry, again, we were talking about how smart emotion is, and we're talking about know thyself. That's your brain saying you've got one plan. That plan is not working. Either exit the market or come up with another plan. And then finally, one thing we do this all the time with operators, and we do this with traders too, is even when you've got a great plan, a lot of times you notice you hesitate and you don't act on it. And then you have this regret afterwards. what is interrupting that plan? And the answer is your brain has buried memories of failures. Failures, and those failures manifest as shame and grief, and these are other two kind of signals. You look back over your previous trades and you feel a sense of grief. You're like, oh my God, that was tragic that I screwed that up. Or you feel shame. You're like, I'm such a loser. I'm such a failure. The moment you have a bad trade, do what operators do and give yourself what's called a hot wash. Write down everything that you did. Write down everything that the market did. And then put it away. And then before you make your next trade, come back and read that, look that over, and remember that information. Because by doing that, you're going to stop shame and grief from coming back. If shame and grief come back, then when you're making a good move, shame and grief are going to interrupt it by making you second guess yourself. So you got to process the shame and the grief. So I've just kind of walked you through those 4 emotions and how they help you know yourself. And I can almost guarantee you that your trading will improve significantly if you learn to engage and monitor when you are scared, when you were angry, and when you were having these grief or shame flashbacks.
So, I don't boast about being a poor student. It might have been laziness, but I absolutely remember vividly, and particularly in high school, just watching everyone seem to understand these physics and understand this chemistry, and just looking at the chalkboard, and it just well be written in kanji, just as well been in Japanese, just absolutely. But there was one class I took in college, and as I listened to you, it just really blew me back on what you said right there. I was the worst basketball player in the history of my school, but I had a great Hall of Fame coach in Rick Majerus. And it was interesting what you said. We always had a game plan. We always had a plan B. The emotions you described, where all of a sudden the score gets out of control and there's fear, but then you try something and you only have one plan, it doesn't work, you get angry. And then the ability to watch a film after and slow down and identify everything you just said is like, that's my whole basketball experience. And we have trading journals where we go back, and that's why you keep a trading journal. Say, okay, what did I do? How was I thinking? Going back. You're standing in a foul line, and hopefully you're not thinking of those failures you had in the past. It's just incredible. When people come to me, they say, I want to make more money. And I say, well, you're not embarking on a journey of making more money. You're embarking on a journey of personal development, because all of your weaknesses, if you become an investor and entrepreneur, will be put on display for the world, and you get to root those out and change them. And that's why, Primal Intelligence, you're smarter than you know, has to be in someone's library. Things like this give insight that not just make you a better trader, they will make you a better father. These things transmit I'm searching for the word transcend is the word I was looking for. Transcend trading or anything else you do in your life. But it certainly applies to trading. Let's talk about AI. AI is kind of an illusion. We don't have general AI yet. It doesn't think. What it does is it predicts what it thinks we would want to hear. It's very predictive. It's not contemplative. It's just algorithmic predictions. What's the difference between AI thinking and you mentioned that you said that if we get caught in some of this, there's danger, but it's easy to get back out of it. Could you talk a little bit? I was interested in that. Could you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, so AI works through big data. That's the secret to AI, is that it can process more data than any human. So you got to ask yourself, what does data do? And the answer is data perfectly predicts yesterday. So what AI is great at doing is AI is great at seeing these patterns and these trends. And if they repeat themselves because the market is stable, AI is always going to beat you. And there's always going to be pockets of stability in any market. I mean, that's just the way that it is, And so AI is going to be able to pick up on those faster than you, and it's going to be able to exploit them. But we're seeing unprecedented volatility in the market now. And even in relatively stable markets, there's always quite a lot of volatility. And AI is much slower to react and respond to volatility than a trained investor, because as a trained investor, you're not looking for the pattern, you're looking for the exception. You're looking for the anomaly, because the anomaly is the emergent problem or the emergent opportunity, and your brain evolved to spot those things. And the problem is, the more that you live in the suburbs, The more that you spend time with technology, the more you live in these regular environments, the more that your brain filters out exceptions as noise. It says, you know what, that's a blip, that's a glitch, don't pay attention to that. But the more you travel, the more you hang out with interesting people, and the more you challenge yourself to do new experiences, the more your brain goes back to its primal nature, which is to value the exceptions, because in exceptions it sees opportunities. And so as a trader, you've got to be disciplined and get yourself out of comfortable environments where you know everything. Get yourself out of comfortable routines. A routine is another name for an algorithm. You're becoming like a computer, except you're not as good at being a computer as a computer is. So you're always going to lose if you take that computer thinking into the market. And computer thinking could work in the markets maybe 20 or 30 years ago before computers got as sophisticated as they are now. So a lot of traders did develop these algorithmic processes.
Jim Simons, for example, yeah.
100%, 100%, Renaissance technologies. But now, that's not going to work anymore. And so what you've actually got to do as a trader is you've got to learn to be comfortable in volatility, because if you're comfortable in volatility, first of all, you're going to be ahead of the algorithms. And second of all, most of the other human traders are going to freeze in volatility. They're going to be uncomfortable. And if you come in with a plan in volatility, if you are able to spot exceptions, spot opportunities, put in a little bit of money right at the beginning of that trend, that new trend, that emergent trend, and see, is this doing what I'm expecting? Make your own hypothesis. If that starts to bear fruit and then you go in with big leverage, you're going to beat every other investor in the market, because AI is not going to see that pattern before you do, and the other investors are going to hesitate. So that's really the key, is practice getting comfortable in uncertainty, practice leaning into anomalies and exceptions, and then once you see things starting to unfold the way that you think they're going to unfold, don't question yourself, go in with leverage.
It's interesting you talk about having only one plan. I have one of our instructors, his name is Noah Davidson, and he created a course very similar to what you're talking about. It's called the Playbook. And what the playbook is, it's a non-predictive playbook. In other words, we know this, the stock can go up, down, or sideways. That's pretty much the three we deal with. And what we do is we have a decision tree that goes out, usually 2 layers, if you're sophisticated 3. And you say, all right, if it goes up, this is how I react, this is my plan. If it goes down, this is how I react, this is my plan. If it stays the same, this is how I react, this is my plan. And here's the adjustments I will make beforehand. And it reduces the anxiety of not having a plan. It takes away the anger of only having one plan, and it gives us the ability to be a little bit more adaptive. This is really interesting about getting out of my own routines. You spoke about travel. Maybe I need to do that. I spent 14 years on Robert Kiyosaki's advisor team. We went all over the world. I've been to every state except North Dakota. For some reason, I haven't checked North Dakota off yet. The other 49 I've been to. A lot of time in Ohio. But maybe I need to get back into that because, I do get in a routine. And I've always heard that routines are, you get in a good routine. I think there's some successful ideas to that. But this is very interesting to notice anomalies.
Yeah, so routines lift your floor. And, that's important. Like if you have good habits or you have healthy habits, right, it lifts your floor. You're not going to waste your day if you've got a good routine for the day, right? You're going to get up, you're going to do some exercise, whatever, right? You just lift your floor. But your ceiling.
Also have a ceiling.
Yeah, and that ceiling is raised by taking risks. And you take risks, you got to take smart risks. How do you take a smart risk, right? Well, first of all, you got to practice taking risks to learn about your own emotional response to those. You were talking earlier about being an athlete. Athletes can make great traders because a lot of being an athlete is taking smart risks. Is you see an opportunity faster than the coach does, and you go for it without the coach saying, go for it.
We make a read. You make a read.
Exactly, right? And then you start to become, and then you start to trust yourself. You start to say, oh, I'm seeing these opportunities. And the reason that travel is really important. So this is, again, coming straight from Army Special Operations. I can't take credit for this. But when they want to raise someone's ceiling, they send them to a new culture. And by going to a new culture, I don't mean, going to France and staying in the Holiday Inn and then eating at the McDonald's. You know what I mean? I don't mean like doing your American thing overseas. Yeah. I mean getting out of your comfort zone where everything around you is weird. Because the thing is, when you're in your comfort zone, when you see things that are new or unusual, you judge them as wrong because they become inconveniences to you. You say, that's irritating. I don't like that right now, right? Whereas when you're traveling and something goes wrong, you're like, this is an opportunity. The fact that my flight just got canceled, now I can spend another day in this place and talk to these people that I wouldn't have talked to otherwise. You know what I mean? The fact that they don't have the food that I want on the menu means I can try something else and I can explore it. And you start to get into that opportunity state of mind where instead of being locked in judgment and discounting things, because what judges? A computer. Remember, a computer rejects things. It skips over exceptions. It regresses them to the mean. You're getting caught in that computational pattern. Whereas when you're traveling, you're constantly having to be flexible, adaptive, open, and you find new things when you travel. I mean, everyone has a great story of a vacation where something happened that you didn't expect to happen on that vacation, and that was the best part of the vacation.
Yep. Fantastic stuff. You know, I can't imagine anyone that is listening to you for more than 5 minutes would not want to take you out for a steak dinner and pick up the tab. And I'll tell you that you can spend a lot less than that and get a lot more than just an hour if you go to Amazon.com and get your copy of Primal Intelligence. You're smarter than you know. My library, it is interesting when people walk in my office, I have it in sections. Which is strange that I would be somewhat organized there. But I have more books on personal development, psychology, and know thyself, than I do on technical analysis, fundamental analysis, quant trading, any of that stuff. Because what you've hit upon is really a secret sauce. So go there now. As a person who has written a couple of books, I would just tell people that when you write a book, you're really making a best effort to organize your thoughts and what you think you know so far in a special way. And when you pick up Primal Intelligence, you get to, in a sense, dive into Professor Fletcher's mind, his experience, what he's done, all these things. And it's such a high leverage activity. I mean, I can buy a stock and it might go up a couple bucks. But I can invest, $20 in a book, and it can, those books can be worth millions of dollars to people. It's a high leverage investment. I recommend it. For someone who is thinking about that, they're a little bit afraid because they maybe not have a plan, or they're a little bit hesitant to say, look, I think I'd like to develop another skill or another income stream in life, take a crack at it. And they're on the fence and fear is in their way. What would you say about that? I mean, that's a primal emotion, fight or flight, or don't know, that's scary, that's unknown. What would you say to the beginner is the last question about the importance of education, the importance of taking a shot, and what advice would you give someone that's a little nervous about getting started?
First of all, beginners do have the lowest floor, but they also have the highest ceiling. So I would say to every beginner, if you're nervous about taking a shot, you have a chance of outperforming even the masters, but you've got to take that shot. As far as what you're talking about in terms of books, let me just tell you a super quick story, which is when I got inside Army Special Operations, they led me into this room. And, in this room were all these operators, and the guy in charge, points to me and goes, "These are the smartest operators in the world." And then he points to them and goes, "Listen up, this is the professor, and he's here to make you even smarter." And I was like, okay. And then he looks at me and he goes, "Professor, make them smarter." And of course, I was like, what? Because it's like, what do you even say, right, in this moment, right? So I thought quickly, and instead of saying anything particularly informative, I said to them, look, in order to make you smarter, I need to know what you currently know. I need to understand where you're already at. So take me through your facility and help me understand how you've become so smart. Tell me how you become the best operators in the world. And so they took me on this tour of this secret facility. I can't tell you too much about it, but I can tell you two highlights. The first highlight is that there was a room they walked me past that had a huge computer in it. It was like a big AI. It was programmed with all the kind of smartest generals in history. And I was like, whoa. I was like, do you use that to get smarter? And they're like, actually not. We thought that would be helpful, but we found the more time that people spend with AI, the dumber they get. So we actually kind of closed that door and we don't use that. Here's where we get smart. And they opened a door and took me into a room. And you know what was in that room? Was books. It was a library. It was a library of books. And a lot of those books, to your point, were memoirs. They were stories of previous operators. Just like, you're talking about someone's wisdom that they put down on a piece of paper. And they weren't saying, hey, this is right all the time, but this is based on my own life experience. What worked for me, these are my best tips, this is my best advice. And by reading that, what essentially you give yourself is another brain. You give you another advisor in your brain. And the difference between humans and computers is computers are always thinking in one way. They're always using this single logical perspective. That's the whole point of a computer, is to take all the data and, as much as they can, find the right weighting, find the right averages, and think that way. But as a human, you can think like other humans who have different experience in different situations. And the more you read those books, the more you give your brain tools so that when it sees an opportunity, it can say, you know what, who could use that opportunity? This person who I remember reading about, here's what they would do. I'm going to do that now. So if you're a beginner, what I would say to you is, in addition to having a higher ceiling, the great thing is you've got an empty head. So you've got plenty of room to fill it with these other advisors. So go out there, get some books, read some books by some people you respect. They could be athletes. They could be traders. They could be anyone. And if you read my book, you'll see it's full of special operators and the kind of tips and experiences that they have.
Professor Fletcher, we thank you for your time. We know you got a hard stop coming up quick. If you'd hang on for just a minute to allow the data to upload as I close the show, it also is an opportunity for me to thank you. But we so appreciate your expertise and your insights from Primal Intelligence. You're smarter than you know. Great stuff. You've been watching and listening to Cashflow Academy podcast. Drop by cashflowbonus.com for other resources. In addition, free stuff where you can go and move forward in your financial education. We'll see you next time.